is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Joe Biden's trillion-dollar infrastructure plan to rebuild America inches a step closer. We're live in New York.
Our other headlines, a new transatlantic route. JetBlue launches New York to London flights despite the dark clouds of the pandemic.
It's a record breaker. The UK's investment in the financial technology industry hits new heights with $18 billion in the first half of this year.
Algeria alight. Wildfires burn through the north of the country, killing at least 65 people.
And here in Greece, fire flare-ups continue to exhaust emergency services as residents return back to their burned homes.
Rebuilding America, its roads, railways, internet and clean energy. It's President Biden's agenda to unleash an economic boom, throw in medical care and green investment, and you have a spending spree not seen in generations.
An historic $3.5 trillion spending bill has cleared its first hurdle in the United States Senate. A vote sets up a mechanism for the bill to be drafted over the coming months.
All this comes just hours after the Senate cleared a $1.2 trillion infrastructure spending bill to help repair America's crumbling roads, bridges and airports. Well, let's try and make sense of all of this with CGTN's John Terrett, who joins us now from New York. John, so the smaller bill is on its way to becoming law. The bigger one is just getting going.
Yeah, that's right. What happened on Tuesday was that the Senate, and only the Senate, passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, with 50 Democrats voting in favor, 19 Republicans voted in favor, bipartisan support there. This will pay for roads and bridges and port repairs, potholes, that sort of thing, and broadband distribution around the country. Now, it has bipartisan support, mainly because the polls show that the American people want this particular bill. It is much smaller than Joe Biden had envisaged when he set it out. He was thinking more like $2 to $3 trillion. It is, in fact, $1 trillion. Now, it may or may not have to come before the House. There is a mechanism where they can get it by without actually returning to the House. Let's leave that to one side for now, because the more important point is that Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, has said that she won't put the $1 trillion smaller bill to a vote until the Senate, we're back to the Senate now, approves a much bigger $3.5 trillion bill, which they are working on as of this minute. So think of it like this, Robin and Jamie. It's a temporary bipartisan victory for Joe Biden and for the Congress, which for years has found great difficulty in coming together to work together. They have done that, but the $1 trillion bill passed by the Senate, but yet to go to the House. It's on its way, but we have much more to come, Jamie.
So where does this $3.5 trillion bill come in?
The Democrats want much, much more than $1 trillion, literally a lot more. They want to build back better, as Joe Biden says, to make the country better than it was before the pandemic, and they are also fiercely determined to do this. And we know this because Chuck Schumer, who is the majority leader in the Senate, has just given a news conference, which I think is still going on, in which he said they were fiercely determined to do this. So what happened at 4 a.m. this morning, which is about 9 a.m. London time, is that the Senate voted on a mechanism to allow the Senate to begin writing a much bigger bill, $3.5 trillion. It's called the Budget Resolution. And basically what this boils down to, everything I described in the smaller bill, roads, bridges, ports, that sort of thing. Democrats say, look, it's all very well having those things, but if you're going to work on a nice road, crossing over a nice bridge, you want to know that your childcare is well looked after. You want to know that elder care is well looked after in the country, and you also want to know that climate issues are being dealt with. And here the big bill will start to run into some difficulty because President Trump has already let it be known that he thinks this is the backdoor to what they call here the Green New Deal, which Republicans certainly do not support, and nor do many people in the country. So this big bill is now being written. It'll take a couple of months, probably through September, end of August, something like that, probably even a bit longer than that. The problem is the Democrats do not have the numbers in the Senate. They need 50 votes plus Kamala Harris, the vice president, to vote in favor, and those numbers are not there. They have 47 or 48. And a name that you may very well hear of, Joe Manchin, who's a senator from the state of West Virginia, the big cold state. He, for example, is a moderate Democrat, and he said that he won't go any further than around $2 trillion spending, not the 3.5 that is on the table. Plus, the polls show that there's not much support for this particular bill. So the bottom line is that this twin-track approach that the Democrats, who control the House and the Senate, are pursuing is likely to be mired in a lot of bitter wrangling and controversy for certainly many weeks and potentially many months. Robin and Jamie.
John, in the background to all of this, narratives on both sides of the Atlantic rumbling on about inflation. But in July, inflation seems to have calmed a bit.
Well, the question here is inflation what the Fed and the government, the administration, say is transitory, which means it'll continue rising a little bit towards the end of the year and then calm right down again? Or is it basically here to stay? And the views on that are completely mixed. Today, we had the figure for July for CPI, which is consumer price inflation. That's what we all pay in shops and businesses here around the country. Wall Street thought it would be 0.4% up in July. It was 0.3%. So it was just shy. A lot better than the 0.9% that it was in June. And it means that year on year in July, inflation here rose by 5.4%. The main reason, used cars, which had been up 10% in June, in July were ahead by just 0.2%. It seems a funny thing to say, doesn't it, that used cars could affect a figure so much, but I'm afraid it is absolutely true. It plays into the narrative that the Fed is coming out with, which is that this is transitory and it's caused by bottlenecks in supply chains and difficulty in employing staff and things like that. And the direct result on the markets within the last couple of hours, well, long-term bond yields are a little changed. The Dow is up by 0.5%. Jamie and Robin?
John Terrace in New York, thank you very much.
Vehicle sales in China are down for a third consecutive month. They fell by just under 12% in July compared with the same month in 2020. The world's biggest auto market has been badly hit by flooding, the pandemic and the global shortage of semiconductors.
And that semiconductor shortage is continuing to affect car manufacturing, with Volvo's Swedish plant in Gothenburg temporarily halting production from Wednesday. Volvo, which is owned by China's Geely Holding, also had to close their Belgian plant for a week in June.
China's technology giant Xiaomi says it aims to be the world's top smartphone maker within 3 years. The ambitious target was announced ahead of the company's launch of its new Mix 4 handset. Last month, industry figures showed that Xiaomi had overtaken US rival Apple to become the world's second biggest smartphone brand.
London headquartered Deliveroo says the value of orders placed on its platform more than doubled in the first half of this year, despite restaurants reopening. The food delivery firm said its gross transaction value rose 102% to more than $4.5 billion. The company connects customers with more than 136,000 restaurants and 9,000 grocery stores in 12 countries, with its biggest market in the UK.
Cathay Pacific's losses in the first half of the year have narrowed to $972 million. That's compared to the $1.3 billion for the same period last year. But the Hong Kong carrier has warned its outlook remains uncertain as the pandemic continues to affect international travel.
Now, there might be a global pandemic and a record drop in passenger numbers worldwide, but for one airline, there has never been a better time to launch a new service. In just a few hours, JetBlue will become the latest budget airline to make its first transatlantic flight from New York to London.
The company insists there is a strong demand for the route despite the fall in global travel. The airline plans on cutting costs by using smaller aircraft for cheaper flights. Well, let's talk now to Andrew Charlton, who's the managing director of the consulting firm Aviation Advocacy. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. So I think it'd be fair to say that air travel is a shadow of its former self. So what makes JetBlue think that this is the right time to launch a new route?
It's interesting, isn't it, that aviation is about 80% of what it used to be for domestic routes, so within the US, within China, within Europe. But you're absolutely right. It's only about 20% for international routes. But the London-New York route is one of the most important routes in the world. And there is growing hope I'm almost afraid to call it optimism, growing hope that the recovery is happening. Heathrow's had a better July. We're watching travel starting to rise. So JetBlue, I think, which is a small but solidly based US carrier with a good domestic US network, and based in New York, I should say, based in JFK Airport, has decided to chance its arm. I think what they're after is first mover advantage. Now, at one level, now's a great time to start because there are aircraft available at very cheap rates. There are gates available. There are slots available. Maybe they're going to be in front of the wave and they're going to ride that wave to success.
So what would make a customer choose JetBlue over an established airline such as British Airways? Because looking at the fares, they actually look pretty similar.
Well, they're quite innovative, JetBlue. The fares are quite similar, but their business class product is very nice. I speak from experience, I'm pleased to say. Their economy class product, from which I also speak from experience, is better than your normal long-haul economy, American carrier economy. They have things like free Wi-Fi and free video and things like that. They've done a very good job of making what is a low-cost carrier more comfortable. And they have experience of flying long-haul transcontinental from New York to Los Angeles and routes like that. And then, as you mentioned in your intro, they're using an aircraft called the Airbus A321 long range, A321LR, which is a really fascinating development. It's a small aeroplane. I mean that ever so nicely, but it's a small aeroplane which has been constructed to fly long distances. So it changes the dynamics of the market. Historically, we've used jumbos, we've used 777s, and they are big and they need 250, 300 people. The A321LR only needs about 100 people, 120 people. Changes the economics. So it might be that the prices are similar, but the prices only have to be slightly better, meaning slightly lower, for it to be attractive for a lot of passengers. And they're banking on the pent-up demand.
Let's talk about Heathrow for a moment. You said that Heathrow had a better July. What do you think the picture is for this now?
Well, you know, it's a bit of a curate's egg, isn't it? Heathrow has had a better July than last year, but that's damning with the very, very faintest of praise. It's clear that there is pent-up demand, and what we've seen at Heathrow is what we've seen at every other airport. As sectors are opened, as travel between countries is allowed, there is a rush for people who want to travel there. And so Heathrow has had much improved performance compared to what it was last year and even compared to what it was earlier this year. And the summer this year, the carriers within Europe and the carriers regionally are looking at, as I say, 75 to 85% of the services that they operated in 2019. Nothing compares to 2019, but 2021 certainly looks better than 2020, and perhaps 2021 is the start of the turnaround.
So this new flight from JetBlue will be flying into Heathrow, but not out of it, because people from the UK are not currently allowed to enter the US. So can it be a success with traffic initially only going one way?
Well, Americans are allowed to fly back to the United States, of course. Those entitled to fly back to the United States are entitled to, and many Europeans are entitled to fly to the United States. Heathrow is a remarkable airport. Heathrow has connections from literally all over the world. So the fact that the UK citizens can't fly to the United States at the moment isn't of itself the end of the story, because, as I say, at least those passengers who have flown over will return. So there will be return passengers and other, I believe, interlining and connecting passengers. But again, maybe what JetBlue's doing is just trying to get that little bit ahead of the curve and to be on the ground and operating when finally the restriction stopping Europeans flying into flying into the United States is lifted. Then at least they're in the game at that point. So maybe their hope is to have first mover advantage.
Andrew Charlton from Aviation Advocacy, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Records are being broken. The UK's investment in the financial technology industry has hit new highs, with almost $18 billion worth of deals in the first half of this year. That's according to a KPMG report, which says this places the UK second in the world behind the United States. Karim Haji is head of financial services at KPMG. I asked him what makes the UK so attractive in the fintech world.
I think firstly, I'd say the UK has a very big, deep financial services sector, which is global in its nature and footprint. And that certainly has helped the investment coming into fintech or financial technology. So that's, I think, the first point I'll make. Secondly, the UK is well reputed for having fantastic laws and regulations that are so important for the financial services industry and fintech. And finally, I'd say the language plays a big part too. So a lot of the world, that these fintech companies want to reach to use English, and the English language clearly plays another big factor in this.
What about Brexit? I mean, will we see the effects of Brexit at some point? Will it turn the taps on or off for the UK?
Well, look, I think, as I said previously, Jamie, the UK does have a financial services sector and fintech sector that serves the whole world. So whilst Europe is clearly a very important market to the UK, it is not the only market that the UK is servicing. So I think it's really important that the UK and the regulators and the government focus on that wider market, that's the entire world. And I think that will stand the UK in a good place going forward, even after Brexit. And since Brexit, there has been significant investment in the UK fintech sector, as was shown by our report. So 24 billion in that period, which was post-Brexit.
Well, what about the pandemic? Global fintech investment is surging, as you say. To what extent is this due to the pandemic?
Well, I think it's not just entirely due to the pandemic at all. I think there was already a trend with significant investment going into fintech and into technology more generally. I think what the pandemic has done is accelerated the pace of change in terms of digitization, and that certainly has helped, but it's an acceleration of what was already happening. And so I think this trend's been there for a while and will continue to be there.
What about the security of data? That's a big issue in this story, isn't it? The GDPR question. How worrying is this for this sector?
Well, I think GDPR is an important issue. I think it's clearly important that people's data belongs to them and care is taken about how that data is used. And so I don't see this as a particular threat to the industry, but something that they should be cognizant of and make sure that they do comply with the regulations, but more so use it to engender more business through greater trust from their customers, that they know that their data is being used in the right way. So I think it can be an asset as well for the industry if it's used in the right way.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, fintech firms are also flying in the UAE. We'll find out what's behind the boom there.
Plus, a British man working at the UK Embassy in Berlin is arrested on charges of spying for Russia.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Dozens of wildfires have been raging across Algeria. Fires are spreading just east of Algiers. At least 65 people have died, including 28 soldiers deployed to rescue villagers. Remote villages and limited access to water are hampering efforts to contain the blazes. Some villagers are fleeing, while others are staying put, trying to hold back the flames.
There are victims. The house is burned. People have died. The olive groves that I inherited from my grandparents are completely burned down. We're working on our own to put out the fire. The citizens are fighting the fire. Where are the authorities or the fire brigade?
A wildfire that spread overnight in central Greece has forced the evacuation of dozens of villages in the western Peloponnese. The fire started near the site of the first Olympic Games in ancient Olympia. Until now, the ancient site's been spared as hundreds of Greek firefighters battle the blaze with the help of colleagues from the UK, France and Germany. Meanwhile, in northern Evia, flare-ups continue to be the main problem, with fires raging there for a ninth day. Well, CGTN's correspondent Evangelo Sipsas is in Athens. So, Evangelo, how are efforts to contain the fires going?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, there's multiple fires that are continued to burn out throughout Greece. The one in northern Evia for 9 straight days, and the ones that broke out a few days ago again in the Peloponnese. As you mentioned, the ancient Olympia, the site of the original Olympic Games, has been spared, but a nearby town called Hordinia was not as lucky as the flames raged through the residents' houses. They're burning everything. There's been a number of firefighters from other countries who came to support the Greek firefighters from the UK, from France, from Sweden, bringing a number of helicopters and a number of planes to try to contain the fires. Now, this fire has been burning since the early hours of Monday and is continued to burn now.
So what about the victims of the fires? How are they coping?
Well, a lot of the victims that their properties have been destroyed had to be evacuated. It is a traumatic experience for them. As I went around and I spoke to a lot of them, they told me that it was very difficult for them to experience their properties and houses that they built with so much of their finances and so much effort within a few hours to be burned down. I went around and I spoke to someone, a resident here in the northern part of Athens who lost his property, and this is what he had to say.
It has been only a few days since the devastating fires north of Athens, and residents in the town of Aripopi have begun cleaning up. Local resident Vasilis has returned to clean up and collect whatever is left from his 2 houses. The fires circled his properties, burning his cars, a guest house he recently built, and the entire rear of his main house. The room where his 2 granddaughters slept, now a pile of debris.
The forest is very thick here. Even if fire trucks came in here, they would not do anything, and we might even have deaths. There are not fire zones to go in and control the fire, and the result here is for all of this to happen.
At its peak earlier this month, firefighters were called out to some 500 fire fronts across Greece as the country experienced its worst heat wave in decades. Thousands of people were evacuated, hundreds of homes lost, farmland and pine forests destroyed. Here in Athens, emergency services were in a race against the time to put out the flames. But many believe crews were too slow to act.
What would you expect if you were in my shoes? I want politicians to answer that question to themselves. What would you expect from the authorities? There are no foundations, and they should have created fire zones near here.
From burned trees to burned businesses and houses, the livelihood of thousands taken away by the flames in a matter of hours. Where once used to be a living room, now lies a pile of debris. The Greek Prime Minister apologized to the fire victims, saying that the government takes full responsibility.
The extent of the destruction, especially in Evia and Attica, blackens all of our hearts, and I am the first to apologize for whatever weaknesses existed. I completely understand the pain of our citizens who saw their houses and property burning, the upheaval of having to abruptly leave their homes.
The fires in most part of the country now seem to be under control, as hundreds of water bomber planes, helicopters, and manpower from abroad have been drawn to the battle. But for Vasily, who put all he had into building these houses, his battle is just beginning. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
Meanwhile, in Italy, the army's been called in to fight worsening fires in the south of the country. Troops have been deployed in Calabria, where wildfires are now thought to be threatening the UNESCO-listed medieval town of Stilo. In Sicily, where 34 separate blazes are still burning, the island's president has called on the government in Rome to declare a state of emergency.
California's biggest power company is in the spotlight over the Dixie Fire, which has now become the largest single wildfire in the U.S. state's history. Pacific Gas and Electric said a blown fuse last month may have started two fires that eventually merged.
The company was already found responsible for the Camp Fire in 2018 that killed 85 people. Adis Tianshan reports.
On July 13th, a fault was initiated on our line by a tree falling on our line.
And that may have started the Dixie Fire, according to the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. If confirmed, it would not be an isolated incident.
Almost 100% of our fires that are ignited during severe wind events are started by people, either directly or indirectly through infrastructure failures like power lines going down, that sort of thing.
PG&E's electrical equipment has been traced to hundreds of fires in recent years. In 2017 alone, 17 of them became major wildfires.
Several wildfires in the past have started because of fuse blown from faulty power lines, including the tragic Camp Fire from 2018 that claimed dozens of lives. And this year, once again, the Dixie Fire, they believe, may have started because of the same reason. As a result, the largest utility company in California, PG&E, announced that they are now ready to invest in underground power lines, especially in areas like this with high risk of wildfires.
In order to shield itself from tens of billions of dollars in potential fire liabilities, the company filed for bankruptcy protection in early 2019. Just last summer, it exited bankruptcy with $38 billion in debt, including $25.5 billion for fire-related claims. Its new CEO has a new strategy for dealing with the fires.
We are here today to launch our Make It Safe, Bury the Lines program for PG&E. We are committing today to undertake one of the largest infrastructure projects in the history of our state.
But how much will it cost and who will pay for it is the main question on everybody's mind, including the president.
I understand they recently announced underground 10,000 miles of power lines. Is that true? And what's that going to do to the cost of energy in your state? And I mean, because that's expensive stuff.
It's $1 million to $3.5 million a mile to underground in California. Do the math on 10,000 miles. Of course, do the math on decades of neglect. 10,000 miles, drop in the bucket.
Newsom did not say how this could impact the cost of electricity for PG&E customers in California, but he does acknowledge the project could cost tens of billions of dollars just for the 10,000 miles, only a fraction of the power line network. It may help prevent fire ignitions in California, but its feasibility is far from clear. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
A British man has been arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for Russia. He worked in the British Embassy in Berlin and is accused of passing on documents in exchange for cash. CGTN's Trent Murray has the story.
Well, it reads like a plot line from the depths of the Cold War. A 57-year-old UK national that worked here at the British Embassy in Berlin, arrested by German police for allegedly spying on behalf of Russia. The man, known only as David S. because of privacy laws, is accused of giving documents to the Russian intelligence service in exchange for cash. Authorities won't say what the documents contained or how much cash was handed over, but they do say that they think he was working with the Russians since at least November of last year. The man who was arrested just outside of Berlin in the city of Potsdam has now been detained by police, who will today ask a judge to allow them to continue to hold him as they carry out their investigation. His office and his home have already been searched. And as for the Russians, well, their embassy in Berlin is declining to comment on news of the arrest. It's understood this arrest follows a joint operation between both German and British police, with investigators both here and in London now left with many questions about how this high-profile case of alleged espionage could have occurred. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
A Canadian businessman has been sentenced to 11 years in jail in China after being convicted on espionage charges. Michael Spavor was arrested in 2018 along with former diplomat Michael Kovrig. Canada has condemned the ruling, calling it unacceptable and unjust. Spavor, who is based in China but had business interests in the DPRK, has 2 weeks to appeal.
The vote on a new media law bill in Poland, which sparked protests across the country, has been postponed. The country's coalition government is on the verge of collapse after the sacking of the Deputy Prime Minister. The Agreement Party, which he leads, opposes the media reform and voted to leave the coalition, meaning the government might lose its majority. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Penelope Lurch, who's following the story for us. Penny, so some disarray in Poland's coalition government. Tell us more.
Absolutely. Well, after the firing of the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday, this morning, Accord, part of that coalition for United Poland, officially stepped out of the coalition, and we saw 5 deputy ministers also stepping down, which, as you said, could make it very difficult for the ruling Law and Justice Party to be able to pass bills through Parliament and get that majority. They did say, however, they were confident they would be able to do so. There has been some tensions between Accord and the rest of the United Poland coalition around tax reforms and also a media ownership bill. Now, that bill essentially bans any media being owned outside of the European Union and having unless its headquarters are in the EEA, and that it's not funded particularly by somewhere outside of Europe. It's seen by critics to be particularly targeting the largest independent channel in Poland, TVN, which is owned by the US Discovery Network. It is seen that potentially that is being targeted because it is quite critical of the government, and it is one of the only remaining independent news outlets providing some sort of commentary on the Law and Justice Party. So there are concerns that this bill particularly is targeting that network, but it would have effects for other international networks as well.
Well, the vote on the bill has been postponed, at least for now, but what impact could it have on the media and also on Poland's relationship with other countries?
Well, that's just been postponed in the last few minutes, Jamie, so we're not sure yet when it will next be debated, but it was very strongly debated this afternoon. Concerns, particularly from the opposition, that this could put the security of Poland as well as its defence and its trade ties with the US in real peril. We've seen prominent US senators before this vote coming out and saying that Poland should think very carefully about making changes to this media law, especially as that TVN network is due to have its licence expire on the 26th of September. We've also had opposition politicians raising concerns that this could pave the way for Poland to silence more media by taking over other Polish news outlets. So it will have an ongoing effect, not only with the relations with the US, but also potentially with other NATO nations if this law is eventually passed. We'll wait and see when that is next. But it seems that at this stage, that debate has been stopped in its tracks, and there's been large protests in the last few days. So it seems that there is some pressure growing on the Polish Polish government. We'll keep you posted where it goes from here.
Penelope Lierch, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Afghanistan replaces its army chief as the Taliban makes rapid advances.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, Roger. We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: President Biden's $1 trillion infrastructure plan to rebuild America inches a step closer, while Democrats eye an even larger spending bill.
Wildfires burn through the north of Algeria, killing at least 65 people.
And a British embassy worker has been arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for Russia.
Within the last hour, Afghanistan has replaced its head of the army as the Taliban makes rapid progress taking provincial capitals. Meanwhile, talks continue in Doha over the country's future. Delegates from the US, Russia and China are hoping to persuade Taliban leaders to return to peace talks with the Afghan government. Let's talk now to CGTN's correspondent Ali Latifi, who is in Kabul. So we're hearing that the army chief has been replaced, an admission of failure in the face of the Taliban's progress.
No, I don't think it's an admission of failure. I think that's a little dramatic. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon in Afghanistan. Whenever the security situation starts to deteriorate, in the past when there have been a lot of suicide bombings or targeted killings and things like that going on, they've tended to switch out the MOD or the MOI or the head of intelligence, sometimes all three at once. So I don't think it's an admission of failure. I think that's, very strong. I think it's just them sort of scrambling to try something new, something different. But unfortunately, I think the problem is that there's so many institutional issues and so much corruption that just simply trading out ministers and generals and things like that all the time isn't going to solve the base problems.
So are we any clearer as to how much territory the Taliban is regaining?
So the Taliban has definitely made a lot of gains. They've taken 9 provinces in less than a week. But at the same time, they're not, other than maybe Kunduz, they're not really the provinces that they wanted. They were trying very hard for Herat, for Kandahar, for Helmand, 3 of the biggest provinces in the country. and they have yet to take those. And taking those is going to be very difficult for them. So yes, they're making gains, but it's still, to them, it's still not the headline-grabbing gains that they want to be making.
And what is the feeling in the country about the talks going on in Doha?
The talks going on in Doha are important, and especially now that other countries are involved. China is a key ally of Pakistan, which has been accused of aiding and abetting the Taliban for years. So there's a hope that they can put pressure on them. Russia has also been accused in different ways of doing this, so that if they can somehow come to the table and sort of put these things away, same thing with Iran. So it's really a matter of, can these countries really sort of put aside what the Afghan people see as support of the Taliban, and also can these Western powers actually put pressure on Pakistan, especially to actually, end what the government sees as a proxy war, as an imposed war.
Okay, Ali Latifi, thanks very much for updating us.
Well, Afghanistan's swift descent into violence has shocked people in the country and beyond. Those fleeing from regional fighting to the capital, Kabul, say they worry about what the future holds. CGTN's Mohammed Pardes has been talking to Afghans caught up in the chaos.
Some residents of Afghanistan's capital say it is difficult to hope for the future when war has become part of everyday life. Muhammad Yasser is a medical student in Kabul. He is one of many who is concerned and anxious about the country's situation.
If the Taliban want to take control and govern, they must choose a political way to proceed. Fighting in war will bring destruction. As a student, I'm not hopeful for my future. I don't know what will happen next.
The United Nations has warned that the war in Afghanistan has entered a new, deadlier and more destructive phase. The Taliban have made dramatic advances, staking claim over some provincial capitals.
I fled Ghazni 2 weeks ago because of insecurity. It's very difficult for me because my entire family was caught in the fighting. In Ghazni, the Taliban are not allowing girls and women to go to the bazaar.
The Taliban offensive has displaced tens of thousands of people, pushing Afghanistan's future into a humanitarian crisis. Amrullah Saleh, the country's first vice president, has called on international organizations to help those seeking refuge in Kabul. Ahmad Shakib, who lives in Kabul, says the Taliban's rejection of peace talks is not helping the situation.
I can say that it's out of control. We've been seeing the fall of districts and even provincial capitals, and obviously it's affecting all our lives.
The warring parties and international community emphasizing that there is no military solution for the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. But since U.S. troops began its withdrawal from Afghanistan, the violence intensified and the Taliban continues its rapid military gains in Afghanistan. Mohammed Hadis Pardes, CGTN, Kabul.
The Chinese mainland's been fighting a COVID outbreak triggered by the highly infectious Delta variant. Zhengzhou, the capital of central Henan province, reported 7 new cases. Anyone who has had close contact with suspected or confirmed cases is being quarantined in designated isolation hotels. Xia Ruishui reports.
So far, more than 15,000 people are residing in nearly 200 centralized isolation hotels in Zhengzhou after a resurgence of COVID-19 infections broke out in a hospital on July 30th.
We check their body temperature twice a day. We give them traditional Chinese medicine to prevent disease, and we check if they feel good after they have the medicine. We try our best to satisfy their needs.
The hotel is being divided into 3 sections, which are the contaminated area, the buffer area, and the living area. 2 special channels have been established. One is for isolated guests, and another is for our staff members. This is to guarantee physical isolation.
During the quarantine, hotel room service staff, security guards, and health prevention staff work shifts spanning 24 hours. Every day, they provide meals and essentials to the isolated persons, collecting their household garbage and carrying out tests for the virus. They thoroughly disinfect the premises twice a day, inside and outside the hotel. Life is inconvenient due to the epidemic control measures, but everyone here seems to be very cooperating. Many say that they believe the outbreak will be brought under control in the near future. 夏瑞雪 CGTN 郑州河南 Province.
The United States has won the right to extend its appeal to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. In January, a court in London ruled Assange could not be extradited because of concerns over his mental health. This decision now means Washington can challenge evidence given by a psychiatric expert. The US wants Assange to face espionage and hacking charges.
Jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is facing new criminal charges ahead of planned parliamentary elections next month. A statement from Russia's investigative committee says Navalny's non-profit organization infringes on the rights of citizens. If found guilty, he faces a further 3 years in jail.
A two-day rail strike has brought passenger and freight traffic to a standstill across Germany. Train drivers are demanding better wages and a one-off coronavirus bonus of €600. The rail operator Deutsche Bahn has rejected their demands and urged passengers to refrain from unnecessary travel.
Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says COVID-19 is the country's #1 problem and has called for greater efforts to import vaccines. It comes as the country sees a fifth wave of infections, with 42,000 new cases every day. In January, the supreme leader banned imports of vaccines made in the US and UK. Around 4% of Iran's 83 million people are vaccinated.
Heavy rain and flash flooding are continuing to bring chaos along Turkey's Black Sea coast. 13 people have been injured when a bridge collapsed near the town of Bartın, cutting off power. A hospital has been evacuated while stranded residents have been rescued from the rooftops of their homes by helicopter.
Repeated lockdowns and travel restrictions have caused major disruptions to businesses around the world.
But for fintech firms in the United Arab Emirates, it's been a boom due to the rapid changes in consumer spending. Jacob Greaves looks at how a region where cash used to be king is now driving cashless solutions.
Launching a startup during a global pandemic might not be a recipe for success, but for a Dubai-based fintech company, it's proved to be good timing. Spotty is a buy now pay later platform offering customers delayed payments on purchases. It's a relatively new concept for the UAE that went live last April.
What we could see was that the macro shifts that were attractive about this particular product just were accelerating in the pandemic. People were in lockdown. People started moving online a lot faster than they had been historically.
Ziad and his team have since expanded into nearby Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman and Kuwait and been acquired by Australian fintech firm Zip for $20 million. Whilst fintech might be growing in the region, it comes from a relatively low base. A 2019 report by the Milken Institute estimated the MENA region accounted for around 1% of global fintech investment.
The infrastructure here set up was always supportive of these alternative forms of payment. So I think that it's just that the consumer is now catching up with the infrastructure as opposed to the other way around.
Whilst the pandemic might have been a catalyst for the adoption of cashless payments, here in the UAE and the broader region there are other factors at play, namely young, tech-savvy populations increasingly embracing online and mobile payments and governments incentivising e-commerce. A recent survey by Visa found that 66% of consumers polled in the UAE expected digital payment options from merchants. That's up from just 18% pre-pandemic. But this trend isn't without its risks for consumers. A study involving Dubai police found 4 in 10 UAE consumers were targeted for online fraud in 2020, whilst any increased digitisation raises potential privacy and data breach concerns.
So global average from a contactless perspective, people using a touchless payment method at the point of sale is circa 50%, and that's after the higher adoption that's been driven by the pandemic. In the UAE, we see that as nearly 2/3 of all transactions, right? So it's sort of setting the pace. In Saudi, that number is close to 80%. So it's a significant lead over, so you could count UAE and Saudi in the top 10, top 15 countries globally.
It's a trend that's seen traditional brick and mortar banks adapt. Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank is one such lender trying to tap into changing consumer habits, recently launching this, the UAE's first bank account that can be opened online using facial recognition technology, part of a bid to compete in a rapidly growing e-commerce sphere.
We've seen a rise in e-commerce during 2020 to $3.9 billion. The UAE e-commerce market was $3.9 billion in 2020, and that's 53% higher than it was in 2019.
One legacy of the pandemic in the UAE and broader Gulf will likely be bringing fintech to the fore. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
It's transforming the world of retail in Asia, and now live stream shopping is coming to Europe. Given a boost by changes in spending habits during lockdown, it promises to give consumers the chance to browse, purchase goods and ask questions from the experts, all from the comfort of home. More at europe.cgtn.com. And remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Lionel Messi says he's very excited to start training and playing for Paris Saint-Germain.
The Argentinian superstar was talking at his first news conference since joining the French club. The world of football is still in shock over his departure from Barcelona. Ross Cullen reports.
Widely considered to be one of the greatest footballers of all time and potentially a one-club man, Lionel Messi has now left Barcelona. His move to PSG is complete, and he says he can't wait to get started with his new team.
I'm very happy. Everyone knows how I left Barcelona a few days ago. It was really hard because I spent many years there, and it's hard to make a move after so long. But as soon as I arrived here, I felt extremely happy. I'm very eager and excited to start training.
His arrival stunned football fans. He seemed set to end his career where he started, at Barcelona. But after a turbulent few days, he is now a Paris Saint-Germain player. For 21 years, the Camp Nou, Barcelona's stadium, was home for Lionel Messi. But he is now here in Paris, ready to grace the grass of PSG's arena, the Parc des Princes.
C'est génial. It's cool. It was unexpected. It's historic. We now have no reason not to win everything. It's just awesome. C'est génial.
Frankly, it's incredible having Messi here. Incredible. We never thought about this. Having Messi here at PSG, you can't dream bigger than this.
Messi has now come to us, and I know that he felt torn between sadness leaving Barcelona and joy coming here. But now he's in Paris, we have to enjoy it and take advantage.
Messi joined Barcelona as a boy, a prodigy already at 13. After a generation at the club and winning 35 trophies, his time came to an unexpected end, as the cash-strapped Spanish club could not financially keep him. It's hundreds of millions of dollars in debt and faces strict Spanish league rules about spending on wages. PSG's president said that despite Messi's huge salary, the French club does follow European financial fair play rules.
Before we do anything, basically, we look at with our commercial people, with financial people, with legal people. So as soon as if you see that we're signing Leo, that means we have the capacity to sign him. If not, we're not going to sign him. We're not going to promise something we couldn't, so we know that we could sign him.
Messi's legendary status has long been secure, and as he enters the autumn of his career, PSG's fans and owners hope that the player known as the Little Magician can continue to cast spells on opposition defences. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Now, another strong showing from China's Olympic team at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games has highlighted just how popular sport is.
CGTN's Sui Hui-ao reports now on how fitness is a way of life for many in China, which bodes well for future Olympics.
If you come to a public venue like this at 8 or 9 in the morning, you will come across groups of Chinese people working out, sweating like crazy while doing their exercises. This is the typical start to the day for many Chinese.
I'm 73 years old. I've been playing badminton for nearly 3 decades. To us, exercise is not about intense competition, but about entertainment. It keeps our body loose and flowing, and our mind active.
I run 2.5 kilometers every morning. I used to be pretty weak after childbearing, but now running every day makes me feel really fresh.
And this fervent enthusiasm for exercise may be further fueled by China's success at the Tokyo Olympics.
Just a week ago, Beijing announced plans to further promote sports and exercise in the country.
In a circular issued by the State Council, the country has set several ambitious targets. One is to have nearly 40% of its population participating in sports activities by 2025. That means the current public service system for sports has to be improved. To achieve that, the circular listed 8 objectives, including creating or expanding 2,000 fitness venues, such as sports parks and stadiums, and hosting more public sports competitions.
This national fitness plan comes just as Chinese athletes were excelling at the Tokyo Olympic Games. Together, they won 88 medals, including 38 golds.
For example, the fitness plan requires students to have 2 hours of sports time every day, including 1 hour off campus.
And it's not just a public exercise. Beijing is also serious about boosting its sports industry.
Another ambitious goal is to expand the industry's total value by 2025 to 5 trillion yuan. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics, the size of China's sports industry increased for 3 consecutive years, reaching nearly 3 trillion yuan in 2019.
This is crucial because the sports industry can be a powerful engine for economic growth. People who exercise daily are more likely to play sports, and they will spend more, like buying sports equipment, signing up for classes, and participating in competitions. That is something that Beijing loves to see. Like what you're seeing behind me, Chinese people want to be fitter and healthier, and China is encouraging that through concrete plans and achievable goals. So Huayao, CGTN, Beijing.
The headlines again. The US president's trillion-dollar infrastructure plan to rebuild America inches a step closer, while Democrats eye an even larger spending bill. It's all part of Joe Biden's plan to unleash an economic boom.
Wildfires burned through the north of Algeria, killing at least 65 people, including 28 soldiers. Fires are spreading just east of Algiers. Limited access to water is hampering efforts to contain the blazes.
And a British man has been arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for Russia. He worked in the British embassy in Berlin and is accused of passing on documents in exchange for cash.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye. Bye.